did she go back then to her country and tell people who were looking to come to the United States, look, this wasn't the best experience, it wasn't positive? What was her?
I think generally speaking, there's like a feeling that for people who are back home that you're in this golden palace when you come to the U.S. And I think in many ways you are. I mean, you're earning 10 times as much. I mean, imagine if you worked a job right now and you got paid $20 an hour. And then somebody said, if you come here to my country, if you fly to Bolivia, I'll pay you $200 an hour. I mean, literally 10 times as much. You would do it, you know? I mean, it's a huge discrepancy in the amount that wages are worth. Similarly, if you can pay a factory worker 20 times less than you have to pay them in America,
right.
in, you know, Shenzhen, China, you're going to move your factory there.
Well, we were talking earlier about value, because $2 over here may not mean anything to an American, but an immigrant, if they sent that $2 over to their country, it's like $1 million, because they can do so much more with it.
But doesn't that go more towards the argument against illegal immigrants, because they're sending the $2 back to their country. They're not putting it back into the United States.
Exactly. That's
economy.
the issue about
the
economy
being
taken away from.
I mean, I'm definitely would love to, you know, talk more about your documentary, but and this kind of correlates to it. But doesn't it, when you talk about Carmen's story, it seems like she, in some ways, using the United States. Did you ever view it like that when you were making the film?
I think that is absolutely true, that immigrants in some way use the country for its economic power.
Right.
I think that the reason you say use, though, is because it's the idea that they don't want to become American. They just want to take back to their own country.
Right.
But I think a big reason that many of them don't want to become American is because there's no opportunity for them to do so.
Okay.
So if you're in another place, if you're in a foreign land and you're discriminated against and you live in fear, and you tell somebody, well, I don't really want to become a part of this place, it's because nobody's giving you the chance to do so. But I don't think they would necessarily be using it to the same degree if they were welcomed with more
open arms.
But again, to your point, the other key issue is that, and I know this is a kind of main soundbite in the immigration debate, but it's largely true, which is that many of these jobs are open because Americans are choosing not to do them for the level of wages that they're doing. Part of the reason I think that they're not doing those jobs is because, one, I think that they should be I do agree with part of immigration reform should be that once you do reform the system, people should not be hiring undocumented immigrants.
Right.
And people should be complying with labor practices.
Yes.
The reason they do now is because they're undocumented, the employers are able to get away with all kinds of awful things, underpayment, labor breaking, exploitation, which both hurts the immigrant and it largely hurts the American worker, because they're being undercut by these ununionized workers with no rights who live there, and all kinds of other problems.
Horrible.
So I think the idea of legalization will benefit the American worker. It'll make immigrant labor slightly more expensive, which is good. And one of the reasons that immigration reform hasn't happened is because big business, big agro-business, and big other businesses don't want to change the system because they prefer this extremely low-paid, with no rights labor that's at the bottom of the rung. So I think that it's true in many ways that immigrants are competing with Americans, but I think we can, by bringing them into the system, by letting them become American, we can stop saying they're doing this and we're doing this. Instead say we're letting people have the opportunity to come into this country, and they're competing with us fairly on the same level for jobs. But for the most part, if they didn't have this kind of exploitation allowable based on their status, American workers would have more fair shot and wages would go up in general.
Just one last point before we have to wrap up. I do want to touch quickly on discrimination. I know in the trailer I saw a part where Carmen was talking about, I'm just here to do the hard work. I don't understand why people don't like me. And you briefly touched on, the fact that people come here and they would want to become Americans if they were welcomed with open arms. Can you talk a little bit about Carmen's experience with immigration discrimination?
Sure. Well, I think Carmen, I don't think Carmen really didn't understand. I think Carmen was really savvy to all of the points that you're making. And I'm making a really pro-immigrant stance, but I understand it's extremely complex. I think the reason it interests me is because it's probably the most complex issue in American politics that there is. And I think that because it really asks, what does it mean to be an American? I mean, are you an American when you've been here for 5 years? Are you an American because you were born here? Are you an American because you speak English? And I think
What gives you the right to be in our country?
Right, and to me that's interesting, not just for America, but it's interesting for the whole world. And I know this doesn't really answer your question, but there's a huge amount of discrimination that I'm just as against. I criticize some aspects of U.S. immigration policy because I'm a U.S. citizen and I vote here and I pay taxes that pays the salary of all these horrible politicians. So, I want them to listen to me, and I want to come on your public access show, to try to tell the good people of Brooklyn to...
A lot of them do watch public access.
Good. But so just to make my point is that, however, not just in the United States do these problems exist, but in Mexico, the discrimination against the Central Americans is horrible.
Right,
and in Europe, the discrimination against a lot of the Arab and North African peoples is horrible. And in, Eastern China, the discrimination against the Tibetans and the, Uyghurs, and, I'm just giving every example in the world. So this is not just about what does it mean to be an American, but it's about what does it mean to be a human being, and are we going to make our value judgments about people because we're American or Chinese or Bolivian, or because we share a certain same value about caring for our children.
And I want to make one quick point. I wanted to say something, like now that big companies like Dell and American Express has begun outsourcing their companies, cheap labor to India, places like India, I wonder if you see a changing landscape in immigration in the trend of having to or feeling the need to immigrate to the United States now that big companies, American companies, are outsourcing their labor to
They're outsourcing at such a lesser rate, though. They're paying their employees the rate that's going in India, not American wages in India. So
that's capitalism.
Yeah, but maybe you have a different perspective.
I don't think it's necessarily. The thing is, I'm sort of a pro. In some ways, I support capitalism. And in some ways, I support globalization, more specifically.
Sure.
But I think if you support immigrants, you have to support globalization because it's about letting people go where they want to go. And right now we have a system which, to a large extent, allows capital to go where it needs to go. It allows business to take labor where it needs to go. But there's some jobs that can't be done over the phone, like taking care of your kid or washing your windows. And so to allow the work that can all be done to go overseas and to be underpaid there, but to not let those same people have the opportunity to work in the non-virtual world here, I think is something really wrong with it.
Unfortunately, we're actually running out of time, but I do want to give you a chance to tell our viewers where they can go and see the film.
You can find out much more about the film, other screenings around the country, and the DVD release, which will be later this year at www.la-americana.com. Also, if there's any university professors or other organizations watching this or interested, I host a lot of discussions at colleges around the country and here in New York City, so you can reach me on my email, which is at my website.
Okay, great.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you'd like more information on immigration, please visit our blog at insidetheladieslockerroom.wordpress.com. You can also visit us at insidetheladieslockerroom.com and find your way to our Facebook fan page, Twitter page, and YouTube. Coming out and